Hi, I'm Justin Barrett, president of Blueprint 1543.
And I am Ana Avila. Welcome to this Integrated Life, a podcast for those who seek to engage with life's biggest questions using the tools of the sciences with theology. Justin, I'm so happy to be here for our second
Oh,
episode. Yay.
yeah, it's good to
How are
see
you?
you. I'm all right. How are things in Guatemala?
They're good, hot. Unusually hot for Guatemala. I mean, I come from hell, Sonoran Desert, but I've come to get used to the awesome weather here in Guatemala. So when we are in like the 27 Celsius, 28, 29, I start to complain. So yeah, it's been quite hot. I don't like it.
For Fahrenheit people, that would be the upper
Celsius.
80s.
I can't get myself to understand Fahrenheit. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I mean, you are the only ones who use Fahrenheit. Come on.
It was
Why?
kind of imposed upon us by the imperial overlords, though. I
And
mean,
why didn't you get rid of it as you
that's a
got rid
really
of
good question. That's a really
everything
good
else?
question. I know, while we got rid of those UEs at the ends of words like catalog and
Yeah,
extra U's and
color.
words. Yeah, exactly. Why didn't we get rid of Fahrenheit at the same time? I don't know.
I mean, and the sciencey people see how I transition to our topic today because the sciencey people have to use the Celsius and the Kelvins and the other measures instead of the ones you use in your daily life. So they have to like do twice the amount of work. That's not
You
fair.
know, I actually think there's a psychological answer to this,
Oh,
probably.
okay. Tell us, please.
But
Please,
this
we
is
need
just
to know.
speculation. No, because I've talked to people about this, having lived in the UK and in the US. Then, you
Mm-hmm.
get into these discussions. What's with the whole Fahrenheit thing? But a lot of those of us who have lived in both systems realize that Fahrenheit is really useful for things like temperature outside. It's a little bit, the units are more intuitive sized for the kind of work that they're doing. Um, and I think that has a lot to do with it. Why, even in the UK, where they use no longer imperial units, but Celsius for all kinds of things, they still use imperial units for things like how much do people weigh. In fact, they even use these archaic things like stones. How
Yeah.
many stones do you weigh and stuff like that? But I think we gravitate to whatever systems feel meaningful to us in that context. Um, and in
So
the
a
context of
hundred degrees is like 100% hot or something like that.
well, I don't think you want to push it into percentages. I think it's more that a 1 degree change in Fahrenheit is a meaningful change, whereas 1 degree Celsius change is like, what's that?
Oh,
It's not
tell
even
people,
big enough.
tell the people in Guatemala because when it
It's like
drops
too
from,
big, you guys.
well, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting take. I
I mean,
still believe
maybe.
you should join us all and stop making me translate the numbers in the recipes because when I find recipes for the oven and stuff, I always have to be
Yeah,
changing
that
it.
translation is not very helpful. No, you're
Yeah.
right. But if you're just
Anyways,
doing it for temperature outside, there's a shortcut that
okay,
those of us
you've
learn.
told me this. You should tell us all because I forget. I
you,
forget.
you
I
double Celsius and add 30 is the shortcut.
Yeah.
And for most temperature ranges, most of the times of year, that does good enough. It gets you in the
Yeah.
right range. Um,
And is there a short? Well, yeah. I mean, still, just join us. Just join us. Muy
but I
bien.
mean, I mean, strictly speaking, Celsius is arbitrary too, right? I mean, it's anchored where on the properties of water.
I mean, water is life. I mean,
That's
water.
that's that's great. And Fahrenheit is anchored to roughly the body temperature of humans is 100, right? Roughly 100. So,
Roughly. I mean,
so they're both kind of arbitrary on a certain thing, and the issue is which arbitrary do you want? And I mean, I appreciate the value of Celsius for doing or centigrade system for doing scientific work, especially.
yes, yes. Well, you're welcome.
I'm not opposed to what you're suggesting.
Justin, let's talk about sciencey people. You are using the sciencey term a lot in recent
Oh, the term
weeks.
sciencey? Yes, yes.
Sciencey, yes.
Sciencey.
You
That's a
should
very
you should tell us about that. What do you mean by sciencey? Because the title of this podcast, well, in the thumbnail, I'm gonna say something like Christians can be sciencey people too. And people might be weirded out by that. So explain to us, what does sciencey people mean?
yeah, I'm using this term sciencey and trying it out. If it's a horrible term, please do let me know. But I'm trying to capture people who have a positive affection toward the sciences. They might work in scientific areas, but they're not necessarily doing science work themselves. Maybe they're an engineer and they're not doing science proper, or they're maybe somebody working in a medical profession who relies on the sciences a lot, or in computer science or something like that, or they're just fond of what the sciences can help us see and so forth. So it's kind of people who have affection toward the sciences and that matters to their day-to-day life. I'm calling sciencey people because what other ways do we modify people? We could say scientific people, but that seems to suggest somebody who's lives their life in a
Yes.
scientific way, or a scientist, right? That's the common thing. But that's kind of too narrow. So, like,
Mm,
some people would accuse me of no longer being a scientist, at least actively, because I'm not doing science proper at this moment in my profession.
yeah.
I'm not gathering data. I'm not doing, well, that's kind of too restrictive. It's like, yeah, no, I've done that, but that's too restrictive. So I was trying to find a term that captures, people who are sort of generally science enthusiast, but I didn't want to just say nerds.
Well, I
Uh,
appreciate
there are
it.
lots of different kinds of nerds, and some are not very scientific or science
That is true.
engaged or stuff. I mean, so
That is true.
sciencey people.
I hope sciencey gets into the vernacular. I love the term. I mean, I am sciencey. I've always hesitated calling myself scientist because I've never actually worked as a scientist. I was trained as a scientist, but I quickly moved on to writing about science. So I feel very comfortable about
Yeah,
the
you're
term
a sciencey
sciencey.
person. Exactly. See, it's for
I love, yeah,
you that
it's
I've
for,
started
thank
using this
you.
term. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
I appreciate it. So, Justin, we want to know, how did you end up as a scientist slash sciencey person? We want to know about your story. I know you've told about your walk in the sciences before, but have people seen you? I don't think so, when you started thinking about going into sciences. And that's what I want to show our audience today. If you're just listening, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to watch because I'm going to present to you Sciencey Justin. Before he became a scientist, this was Sciencey Justin. Ta-da! Isn't that an awesome picture of Justin? It's the same. You look the
Uh-huh.
same.
Another way to put this was Justin with hair.
Justin,
Oh, fun.
tell us about your. This is high school. You told me.
This is a photo that my mother took of me while she was taking a photography class. And yes, this was
You
in
got
high
dressed
school.
up for this picture
Sort of. She actually, as I
because
recall, took these pictures before I was headed to a mock trial competition. So I was dressed up to go and
wow.
pretend to be a prosecuting attorney in a fake court trial in a real
Oh,
courtroom in
so
front of a
you're
real
not
judge.
only sciencey, you're also lawyery.
Ooh, wow. You're trying to get me in all kinds of trouble.
Oh
Um,
gosh, this is a great picture, Justin, and it really
mm.
makes your personality shine. I was telling Justin, this is just you, like 1,000 years ago, but you still you.
1,000 years ago. You're showing
Ju-
your age by making that comment.
I mean, I'm younger than you. That's all I'm gonna say.
Just because that photo was taken before you existed.
Yes,
Jizz.
yes.
Jizz.
So tell us, Justin, about how did you end up from mock trial to actual science? We want to know.
Yeah, actually, I think it was the year that was taken. I was taking a zoology class in high
Ooh.
school. Yeah, sounds fancy. Of course, that's just the
Dude,
study of animals. That's just animal biology.
is zoology still taught in high school? I don't remember having a zoology class, like specifically
Most
zoology.
people didn't, as far as I can tell, most didn't. It was just kind of, this was used as the advanced biology class.
Oh, so you're a nerd, an actual nerd, yes.
Yeah, so you took
That's not
sort of the
surprising.
basic biology and sort of general sciencey stuff. My freshman year, I did that, and then 2 years later, I wanted more.
Of
So
course.
I took the zoology class, and I did grow up a sciencey kid. I just loved reading about the natural world, especially living things, living systems. So zoology was great, and I do remember we in that class we did a lot of dissections of various things, or big old worms and leaves and then frogs. Um, yeah, the science teacher hooked me up with a double pithed frog that was really great. He was
Wow.
like, Barrett, get one of the double pithed ones. They're better than the others. Because he knew I took it seriously. I was slow and meticulous and really wanted to
Oh.
figure out where all the parts were. Um, and he really did talk like that. Hey, Barrett.
Do you remember a teacher's name? Those are,
I don't. I
I mean, but
don't.
you remember how he talked
I
and with
do. I
pride.
remember how he looked too and stuff. He was great, but
Yeah.
um, I do remember also embarrassing him because
Oh,
I was the star student, and we
of
had a
course.
project, and and I was geeking out on this stuff. I remember one day in class, just this sounds really weird now, but just sort of discovering my hand, like looking at my hand and going, "This is so cool! Look how complicated it is, but
I
it
will not
works."
ask if you were
All
high.
of the little things. No, no, no. I grew up in Southern California, but no, I was not high. I never did that stuff.
You were
But
amazed.
I was high on life, on the wonders of God's creation.
Yes,
And
that is
I
good.
really was. I thought, wow, the human body is so amazingly complex and cool. And it made me want to study biology, especially human biology. Um, I don't know at that point that I had any particular views of becoming a scientist.
Hmm.
And that's because I grew up in a church context where it wasn't, I don't think it was really meant to go this way, but had received the message subtly over time that um, if you really took your relationship with God seriously, you had to do churchy stuff. You had to be a pastor or um, a
Missionary.
missionary,
Yeah.
or if you're a musician, a worship leader, or something like that. And I knew I didn't have it in me to be a pastor. I think because my hair was already starting to thin, and for some reason they have unusually thick hair most of the time.
Yeah. Good ones
I don't
too.
know what that's about because there are plenty of biblical characters who did not have unusually thick hair. You
How
know,
do you know that? How do we know that?
Elisha, hello.
Oh, that's true.
Right? Don't make fun of bald-headed
Yeah.
guys. Do
Yeah.
not. Do
That's
not.
dangerous.
That's right.
I was gonna ask you, so you were by this point when this awesome picture was taking already a committed Christian.
Yes.
How did
Yeah.
that come about? I mean, you grew up in this church, but how
I
did you decide, like, okay, this God thing, it's actually a thing?
it was multiple times over and over again, right?
Mm,
So yes, I grew up in a Christian family. As the story goes, I first did I'm committing my life to Jesus when I was 5,
mm-hmm.
watching the 700 Club, did the prayer with Pat Robertson on the television.
I'm sure somebody got that reference. I did.
Yeah, many people will get that reference of a certain
Yeah.
range. And then there was okay, um, revisiting that several times. The last and sort of most important one was for me was actually at a church camp
Mm.
where there was a presentation of the gospel uh, that I found particularly compelling, and I'm like, yeah, I'm all in on this. And it's not that I didn't, that you then turn off your brain and stop asking questions. Is that then I had the confidence to sort of move forward with my
Mm.
questions and everything else. Um, and so, yeah, I was committed. And part of that commitment told me that I needed to do one of these sort of careers that are sort of church approved in a sense. And that somehow there's this hierarchy of professions. And even though I was a sciencey person, being a scientist was not one of those, on the approved list. Again, it sort of goes pastor, missionary, worship leader. Okay, helping professions are okay
Yeah.
because we need those. So doctors, nurses, teachers are okay,
Yeah.
because somebody got to take care of the kids. And it sort of goes down from
Yeah.
there, right? And scientists is way low on the list. It's like,
Hmm.
really?
Really.
Really? So I thought I would be a medical missionary. And when
Mm.
I started looking for colleges, that was one of the things that I was looking for was pre-med programs and pre-missions programs. Um, and that led me into then eventually going to Calvin College, which is now Calvin University. And I came in as declaring that I was going to study biology in the pre-med track and that I was pre-missions. So that's kind of how I started down that pathway.
What is
Uh,
pre-missions?
that's a good question.
I have no idea.
And I don't have any idea either. It meant that I had an advisor who was assigned to me who was actually from the religion and theology department.
Okay. So you're
And
doing sort of integration from.
you might think that I was doing integration. What I was doing at that point initially was just parallel stuff.
Mm.
So it wasn't integrated. I was just doing both alongside each other.
Mm.
Uh, and I thought that if you pick the right career that kind of draws on both, that's good enough. But I
Mm.
wasn't really attentive to how my faith informs or my work that's more sciency and how the sciencey stuff could inform my faith. They sort of weren't touching each other that way.
Yeah.
The sciency type of study or scientific study as a pre-med person was really just a support mechanism to getting in a professional space that then you love Jesus in that space.
Mm.
And of course, you love Jesus more if you're a missionary in a far-flung place,
Of
or you're
course.
doing helping professions like medicine. Um, Interestingly, before I even got to college, I was already having doubts about the whole pre-med thing because
Mm.
I shadowed a doctor for the day and they just do lots of stuff that I just didn't have stomach for. I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's good stuff that has to be done, but
Yeah. You really
uh,
need to have a passion for it. I mean,
I hope that's why they do it. Or I worry that too many have a passion for money and prestige is why they do
yeah.
it. But I really think you're right. I think a passion for people and that care for people is really important. And I'm not saying that I don't like people. I don't like their various parts
I
when they're
like their
breaking
mind.
down. Yeah, I'd rather interact with them in this kind of
Yeah.
way than sort of snooping around. Ooh, what is this spot on you, and where
Yeah.
did it come from? It's like, and then much worse. But
So you
so I
were
was
getting
already making that
disenchanted.
pivot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but I was like, but I'm still in on the biology major,
Mhm.
and I'm still, on the pre-med track. But I didn't know what that. I mean, sorry, the pre-missions. I had a
Yeah.
pre-missions advisor. I still didn't know what this was going to mean though for me. Uh, but I I ended up obviously changing courses. I took cell biology and genetics first semester in college, but at the same time, I was kind of forced to take intro to psychology
Ooh.
as part of just
Why?
distribution requirements because of
Mm.
that general education requirement. I had to pick either intro to sociology or intro to psychology, and I'm like, I'll take the psychology thing.
And you hadn't been interested in science
I didn't
before
know
that
anything
at
about it.
all?
I didn't know
Yeah.
it existed.
Okay.
I thought psychology was just the helping end of things and that it was just
Mhm.
weird psychobabble stuff.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
even lower on the list of
yeah,
things you
that's
should.
really low. Really? You couldn't even manage to be a biologist? You had to go straight to psychobabble? Um, which is totally unfair, but I didn't know it was unfair at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, that really that this then that there's this psychological science area that then supports the best of psychotherapy, counseling, and so forth. Very much like biology and biochemistry, and some of these areas support good medical practice.
Yeah.
There's a psychological science that then supports psychological practice. And so, yeah, that was my first exposure, was my first semester of college. And at the same time, I'm taking this intro to biology, which was great. I still liked it, but I didn't like it quite as much, I think, because it was too micro level.
Mm.
And I've talked to other, biology colleagues in decades since then, and they all say, "Oh yeah, we do this wrong. Why we hit people with, subcellular stuff in the first semester? It's just because that's not what draws most people into
Yeah, that
biology."
was my favorite. My fa
Yeah, it would be.
Cell biology, oh, I love it. When I got, like, genetics and, like, oh, no, I that's my favorite. Anyway, but
Yeah,
not
but you ended
everybody.
up in what? Chemistry, right?
Yeah,
Biochem, which
yeah,
means cells are big systems for you.
yes.
Yeah, and so for me, as somebody who liked zoology and
Mhm.
physiology and anatomy and even ecology, it was like, well, this is really micro. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So it was too micro for me. And then discovering psych science and how, in some ways, it's such a young science that there's so many new frontiers that are sort of that haven't been explored. That was exciting to me, and I found that the idea, just like looking in my hand in that zoology class and being just fascinated by God's sort of creative ingenuity to bring about, this kind of thing that we have on the ends of our arms. Um, well, the human brain and what it
Mhm.
does for us, the function of this, that's just so much more complex, so much more sort of unfathomable on a certain level, and so much more important for our day-to-day existence that I thought, okay, this is the really cool stuff. This is the hard stuff. I want to
Mm.
get in here. This is where the sort of new challenges lie. And yeah, so then that started me down a different pathway. And then there's the integration piece. And fortunately, I did pick a place that one of the reasons I picked Calvin, maybe this is revealing too much. I don't know. Um, I,
We'll see.
I was very committed to going to a Christian college or university because I wanted that ethos.
Yeah.
And it's hard to go pre-missions, if you're not at a Christian place. But I picked Calvin in particular because in the descriptions I read about it, this was back in the days where you actually had to go to books and read these descriptions like college guides, and it was
Yeah.
paper,
Wow.
and you'd have to read what the college says about themselves. And what captured my attention is that this was a place that was a Christian college, not because of lots of behavioral rules. Don't drink,
Mm.
don't dance, don't smoke, don't go to, certain movies. It didn't have all of that. Oh, and you have to go to chapel every day,
Yeah.
7 times a day, if possible. That it wasn't that kind of a place.
Yeah.
It was we're a Christian college because what happens in the classroom,
Mm.
not because of behavioral requirements. Were there behavioral requirements? Sure. But
Yeah.
that's not what they sort of anchored their identity to. What they anchored their identity to is we teach from a Christian perspective. We help our students see how a Christian worldview gives you a bigger,
Mm.
richer view of everything than one that lacks that. And I was like, okay, now that's cool. I want to get in on that. And it was true. It wasn't just salesmanship. It was true. So my biology professors, my psychology professors, my religion and theology professors really helped me better imagine how these different ways of knowing intersect with each other and they flow into each other. And that's when you get the best of uh, with both the ways of knowing and just yourself, your own life, is if you can bring all of these together in yourself. And so that was exciting. And it also opened up to me, well, it helped me reject that idea that I'd grown up with, that somehow there's this hierarchy of professions,
Mm,
some more or less Christian
yeah.
professions. Um, Now, are there some that I think Christians probably should stay away from? Yeah, organized crime boss, off the list. Just
Probably not.
probably
Yes.
that. Authoritarian dictator of a small Latin American country. No, don't do it. It's not a good Christian calling,
Nope.
no matter what my junior high yearbook said.
What?
Um, that's another story. Um, but certainly there's some that, yeah, we should,
Hmm.
I don't know that Jesus would be really happy with us if we,
No.
went after these. But there are plenty where
Hmm.
you can do the Lord's work in these spaces. And being a pastor is not somehow holier than anything else. We don't live in a priesthood anymore.
Mm,
They're not closer to God. In fact, we
see.
are starting to learn they can often be way, way away from God. Uh,
Unfortunately, yeah.
and even biblically, right? The man after God's own heart was not a
Mm,
priest.
mm.
He was a politician. Ooh,
Ew.
ooh, exactly. So if there's hope for politicians, there could be hope for scientists too.
Preach.
So it opened my Calvin helped open my imagination too. I could go into lots of different potential fields, and love the Lord with my mind
Mm,
as well as my heart, soul, and strength. And and then it mattered that Christians were working in those spaces, that bringing a Christian perspective to doing psychological science mattered to psychological science. How it opens up new topics for exploration. It gives us new ways of interpreting what we're finding and presenting that to the world. That so what and who cares changes because of these other values and ways of knowing that are part of the Christian intellectual tradition. And I just found that captivating. So that helped me realize I don't have to be a missionary in a developing country, um, just because that would make me, I don't know, closer to God in some way.
mm,
But that I could be close to God and be a good servant of the kingdom of God, even as a scientist working in an American university. That's not to say I don't like traveling to other places and seeing how I can help out. As I mean, we met in Guatemala, right?
yep.
Um, because I still have some heart for that, but I don't have to do that.
Hmm.
So I mean that's how the transition started happening, and then deciding, oh, so I can actually be a scientist. I can be a psychological scientist. There was a moment once I realized I wanted to be an academic, a scholar, a researcher. I had to decide which area.
Hmm.
And I do have this, it was a brief period, but there was a period when I was, I'm taking the graduate record exam, the GRE as it was called. I don't know if people do that much anymore, because I need to go to grad school, and I'm going to go into psych science, but I did sort of have moments where I wondered, might I go into anthropology or maybe
Mm.
philosophy or maybe theology? Those three were other things I entertained. There was a period actually I thought, "Meh, I don't wanna do this grad school stuff. I'm gonna go into culinary school." Yeah, I'm not
Wow.
not not kidding. Yeah, I really did entertain that one too,
Wow.
because I do like making the food stuff,
Yeah, you
food's
do. And
great.
you do great. I mean,
Wow, thanks.
I tasted Brussels sprouts for the first time at Justin's kitchen and I love them. I don't know why people complain. And Justin has told me because they don't know how to make Brussels sprouts, but Justin knows how to make them. Yes. So good.
Well, thank you very much. And how about the carnitas I made? I mean, come on.
I mean, Mexican approved. Those carnitas
Alright.
were great. Yes.
See, that
Awesome.
that means a lot to me.
That is like so encouraging for people like me who have 1,000 interests. And I'm still like deciding where to focus my intellectual energy. And you know that I always complain about that with you. But knowing that after college you were thinking about going to culinary school makes me feel not so bad that I'm going through seminary right now after studying sciences.
Yeah, well, good for you. Yeah, but I don't think that God gives us one singular vocation
Mm,
necessarily. I mean, maybe for some people he does. Here's your
Maybe, yes.
vocation. But I think most of us know we've got lots of gifts, we've got lots of passions, we're complicated people, and he can use those different skills, giftedness, passions in different seasons of our lives for different types of things. And
Yes.
so what's kind of cool looking back, and the reason why, and it helps me remember, oh yeah, you considered these things, is
Mhm.
even though I went into psychological science, I had to pick.
Yes.
Well, I've had a faculty position in anthropology. I've
Mm.
published in philosophy and in theology. I now have that honorary professorship in theology. I've got to do all of them, at different times, not necessarily all at the
Mhm.
same time.
Yes.
And I still get to make food too.
Yep.
Uh, and, um, and I think that's okay to have that diversity as long as what then gives us our focus is, well, seek first the kingdom of God and his
Mm.
righteousness.
Yes.
Matthew 6:33. If that's our focus is, we're the Lord's people doing his work, then we can have the unified focus and purpose in life that helps motivate us and drive us forward and gives us a flourishing, rich, thriving life, and yet can do lots of other things.
Amen.
Because they're not other things for us. They're just different manifestations of the same missional calling on our lives.
Love
Or
it.
so say I at this moment.
I think you say very, very well. I'm curious about your transition from this Christian college where you were, well, informed not only in your science, but also in theology and how, at least a little bit, how everything connected, and you started to think about integration and stuff. Um, and then you went into graduate school and then into quote unquote secular academia. How was that transition for you? Because, well, some people make that transition right into college because not everyone can go to this kind of Christian school.
Yeah.
And how was that transition for you? And how did you experience it, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful that I got a few years in a Christian institution to help me get my thinking sorted out on this.
Mm,
Because I've talked to a lot of people who, as you say, they go straight into a secular environment, and it's not that they don't get a good education in that space; is that often it makes it harder to realize what the intellectual resources are in a Christian tradition
yeah.
to support doing the science well, and what that looks like. People might think, "Oh, you went to a Christian college, so you got a second-rate education in
Mm,
psych science," and that I did not find that to be true at all. In fact, I did a summer internship while I was still an undergraduate, at National Institutes of Mental Health, in, Washington, DC, where I was just a research assistant for a psychiatrist for a summer, and he was stunned by how much I knew about things that people don't normally know about. Now, I think partly he was coming because he's a psychiatrist. He was coming from a medical science background, and he was used to medical students who don't
mm,
get lots of psychological training. So I don't think I was that amazing, but it was enough for him to go, "You're working on this level of like, second year med students, and you're
mm.
a second year undergraduate from a Christian college? Wait a minute." It's like, no, we actually take, at least at Calvin, we take this stuff seriously, and you got to learn things. But yeah, then I went to Cornell University for my graduate work, and which it's Ivy League school, secular. What a lot of people don't know is it was the first. Well, it was, I believe, the only Ivy League that was actually set up when it was established as a secular institution.
Mm,
So lots of American schools, especially the older ones, initially had a strong
yes.
theological kind of angle to them. They have divinity schools. They were set up to train pastors, among other things. Um, Cornell was decidedly not. If anything, it was anti-religious.
Mm, mm.
Uh,
And
but
why did you pick that school
why did
after
I pick?
picking
I didn't
Calvin?
know those things. Well, here's the funny thing: is in it just sounds wrong. In some ways, it was my backup school.
Oh.
And
Oh.
I don't mean because it was sort of a low-rated school or easy to get into or anything like that. It's just that, I wanted to study, um, how religious concepts are formed,
Mhm.
especially, how do people think about God?
Mhm.
Because, I mean, it seems to me there was theological reason to think, well, knowing God is a really kind of important thing in life,
Yep.
and it's way understudied.
Mm.
So here's an area I could make a contribution. And if we're talking about how people think about God or form concepts of God, I thought, well, I should take what's called a cognitive approach to this and look, maybe cognitive psychology or cognitive science has something to contribute to this. And yet nobody was taking that kind of a cognitive approach to this study,
Mm.
the study of God concepts. Um, and I had a backup kind of interest because I knew it was rare to find somebody, who would let you study,
Yeah.
religious thought in this way. And so my backup interest was actually, psychology of music.
Oh.
Um, and Cornell had a leading, music psychologist. And so that's
Oh.
actually why I'd put my application into Cornell initially. It was to study music psychology. But that was not my preference. It was sort of,
Mhm.
I hoped I would be able to study, basically psychology of religion from this particular angle. But the schools that I had applied to and didn't let me in. I didn't get any follow-ups from those that I applied to study psychology of religion. I did get invited to interview, and was admitted to Cornell. And then through the interview process and so forth, I discovered, the person who would be my doctoral advisor, Frank Kyle, that even though he had never worked on religion per se or religious concepts, he was a broad thinker, very creative, and basically took the attitude that if he wanted to learn about something, yeah, you could study that. Let's learn about this together. And so it really
Nice.
worked out well for me, just because he was a curious and very creative, intellectual, person. So, so it worked out. I ended up at Cornell, a very secular place, as I said. That doesn't mean I was the only Christian there.
Mm.
But it did mean that most of the Christians keep their heads down. They hide
Mm.
out. They try to keep a low profile because the place can be pretty antagonistic. At least at that time it was. I assume it's probably still the case. Um, but that was in some ways a good thing because then I
Mm.
was in lab group meetings with people with a diversity of worldviews. It didn't take long for them to figure out that, yeah, I'm the Christian guy in this space. And that opened up the opportunity to have lots of good conversations with people. Some of them on the level of, why are you Christians always trying to convince us, that of your worldview? Why don't you just
Mm.
leave us alone? So we'd have those conversations. Um, or, somebody's going through a relational problem and they might pull me aside and go, okay,
Mm.
I'm having these relationship problems. I'm curious what a Christian perspective in this is, which I found surprising because they weren't necessarily Christian. In fact, in this
Mm.
particular case, no, but wanted to know, well,
Yeah.
is there anything from your tradition I can use,
Yeah.
basically? Um, I also got these, the Bible says some weird stuff. Explain
Mm.
this to me. Those kinds of conversations too. And some of it was a little more antagonistic, more of the, how can you believe this crazy stuff? You seem like a smart person.
Yeah. Mhm.
But I think all of that was good for me because it prepared me for, working in an academic world where you do have to have thick skin. You got to be tough. You have to have good answers. Um, but because of the way that the grad school experience can work, at least in this context, socially, how it works
Yeah.
is we spent a lot of time with each other, in
Mm.
these lab group meetings. And so I got to know a lot of the other doctoral students more on a personal level. So we had that relational space that made it a safer space to have these hard conversations and not feeling like this is a personal attack because Okay, this is going to sound really nerdy, but one of the things we did was a typical Sunday, I believe it's Sunday evening, was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation at Dan Simon's apartment.
Very nerdy.
Dan
Yeah.
Simons, who is now the professor of psychology at University of Illinois and famous for his work on the invisible gorilla and some of these other things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, he was my office mate, and he hosted a whole gathering of us at his house once a week to watch Star Trek: The Next
Of course.
Generation. And then sometimes we'd stay after and play games and things like that. So we had this little built-in community of people. Again, lots of different worldviews. Most of them, I think, probably, not religious in any active sense. Certainly not Christian. Uh, but that was okay. They were our people, and we got to know them, and it was a good incubator for me to
Hmm.
sort of grow up intellectually a little bit more. We had our kids when I was in grad school, and all of these nerds bought developmentally robust toys for
Of
our
course.
son and things like that, because they're gonna research this, and what's the
Yeah.
science say about this, and half of them were developmental psychologists. So like,
Were your kids involved in children experimentation?
our son sure was. Our daughter was a little young she was in a couple, but our son, yes, he even graduated from the Cornell baby lab. He's got the t-shirt and
Oh,
everything. Because after so many experiments, they graduate them because they start getting too comfortable and they might get strange and
yeah.
produce weird
Well,
data from being in too many baby experiments. But yeah, I think it's only 5 experiments, and then they say,
oh,
"You've done
cute.
enough. You've paid your dues." But he was great. Yeah, he was
So
good
cute.
at it.
Oh, well, that is great to get to know a little bit more about your story. And I wanted us to close this episode with some thoughts for those of us who weren't fortunate enough to be part of college experience that solidify our faith and helped us see how it relates to different disciplines, scientific ones particularly. What would your advice be for those students who want to grow in their faith and learn more about how it's not at odds with the discipline they're pursuing, but they're not in this environment where their teachers can help them do that. So maybe they feel like they've been thrown into this secular um, place where they just are humiliated or belittled because of their worldview, and they don't feel strong enough yet to face that, and they feel ashamed or whatever. What your advice be for those people?
Um, okay, that's a good and tough question. I would guess I would start with, well, don't be ashamed or embarrassed.
Mm,
If you haven't been properly prepared, that's not on you.
mm,
Who should be ashamed and embarrassed is our churches that haven't prepared our young people well enough to do this, but not you. It's not your fault. Is there something you can do about it, though? Sure. I would look. I would seek out, and it's. I would seek out resources, and including people who are really good examples
mm,
of this kind of integration, and they exist now, and they're easier to find than ever. Um, so, in sciencey types of areas, for instance, there are resources out there that are generated by places like the BioLogos
mm,
Foundation, which has a lot of online resources on their website, and especially their podcasts and interviews and little essays by some of the scientists who are also Christians, and how they have talked about how they bring their faith and their science together. They've done a lot of producing good work in that respect. Another way I would go, here's a strategy, is to look up the faculty members at some of these better Christian colleges and universities. Um, who work in, say, a science area or whatever disciplinary space you're interested in. Because a lot of them have done writing on these topics or have given lectures on these topics. Who are these colleges? I've mentioned Calvin. It's my alma mater, and I taught there for a while, and it's got a good reputation for doing this kind of work. But there are others out there. Wheaton College is sort of famously good at some of this stuff. Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California is excellent. Point Loma Nazarene down in San Diego area is good at this, and there are numerous others who faculty members at these institutions are required to think carefully about how their faith and their particular subject go together. And so they've often written essays or done interviews that you can find, or they've contributed books to. There was this old series called the Through the Eyes of Faith series, and they were like mathematics through the eyes of faith,
Hmm.
psychology through the eyes of faith, biology through the eyes of faith. There was a whole series of these books out there. They're probably a little old now if they haven't been updated, but they still that those could be useful resources. And some of these, they're mind blowing. Like I mentioned, mathematics through the eyes of faith. Yes,
Hmm.
some people have thought long and hard about how does a Christian perspective matter to doing even mathematics. And
Yeah.
Russell Howell at Westmont College, for instance, he's really good on this stuff and ways that'll make unless you're a mathy person, it makes your brain kind of hurt a little bit. But if you are a math person, it's like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I would seek out those people as examples, as people who have thought, who have come before and worked hard on this stuff. So that's some advice I'd give. But there's another thing that's really important, and that is it's unfair. What's unfair is the expectation that you as a Christian somehow need to account for your faith, say in amongst your fellow science lab members as a grad student, whereas they don't have to account for
Yeah.
their worldview. So
Hmm.
we get the questions of like, so how do you reconcile this, insert obscure passage of the Bible with what we know about insert obscure area of, I don't know, biochemistry. And like, I'm sorry, do you do that with your worldview? Do you
Hmm.
have it all figured out and sorted? Probably not, but we're expected to do that. It's not fair. What do we do about that? Well, partly we really do need to know our Bible.
Yeah.
We need to educate ourselves on, uh, the basics of our Bible and how to read it accurately. I think the Bible Project has great resources on that,
Yes.
for just thinking well about how to read the Bible, how to think about it. Um, and we need to know our theology reasonably well. I don't mean sort of thoroughgoing professional grade, but at least what are the basics of Christian theology? Because lots of the people who will have the questions often are presenting to us a particular Christian theology, or maybe even a not Christian theology, but they think is a Christian theology, and then make us try to defend that. And we're like, that's just an obscure kind of marginal idea that most of the Christian tradition maybe doesn't even embrace. And yet we're feel like we have to defend that. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, you don't have to. Um, but we do need to, be reasonably educated on these things, maybe even more so than what is uh, fair to expect. But that's part of the job. So, fortunately, there are those who have come before and have done good work on these things. I
Yeah.
hope I answered the question.
I think you did a great job. I think
Oh,
those
thanks.
are great points. And yeah, realizing that everyone has a faith, everyone has a worldview, is very important. And asking good questions, when questions are asked of us, it's a really good thing too. Not feeling that you have to have all the answers, you have to have everything figured out. No, you don't. Um, you can ask questions from the people that ask you questions too, and help
Mhm.
them realize that you're not the only one who believes things about the world that cannot be proven by science. So yeah, that is an important point, I think. Well, Justin, thank you so much. And
Yeah, thanks for talking.
yeah, we want to know more about our audience. So if you have any questions, you can leave them to us on our comments. And we also want to know, have you or anyone you know been discouraged from studying science because of your faith? Or have you felt that you or anyone you know has refused to be taken seriously, um, because they're a Christian sciencey person, let us know in the comments, and we want to continue this conversation. And we'll see you next time. Bye
Yeah, great.
bye.
Bye.